This week on ANN, the president of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church offers prayers for affected families of the terrorist attack in Istanbul's Ataturk Airport.
Seventh-day Adventist leaders in Europe call for unity, love, and commonwealth in response to the United Kingdom's Brexit vote.
And top officials of the denomination elect Salman Mafosa to serve as president of the church's Southern Africa Indian Ocean Territory.
These stories and more coming up.
This is ANN, a service of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church. Thanks so much for joining us this week.
First in the news, Adventist leaders are responding to an attack in the Ataturk Airport in Istanbul, Turkey, that was led by 3 suicide bombers who opened fire in a terminal before detonating their explosives. At the time of our recording, the attack claimed the lives of at least 41 people and injured more than 230. In response to the tragedy, the president of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church, Ted Wilson, said on his Facebook page, quote, "International terrorism is becoming so prevalent in today's society and tells us that Christ's coming is very soon. How sobering to have such terrible carnage happening all over the world. Truly, the Lord is coming soon." Wilson went on to say, quote, "I have prayed for the families who lost loved ones, for the people of Turkey, and for the government agencies that have to handle these tragic situations. I have prayed for our church work in the Middle East and North Africa Union and their important activities to share God's hope for a better world with the millions of wonderful people in that important and vital region." End quote. The president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church's Middle East and North Africa Territory, Rick McEdward, also spoke on how the attack, which took place in a major transportation hub for the region, feels close to home. McEdward said, quote, "This attack reminds us of the personal vigilance we need to have. We need to be prepared for these types of activities whenever they happen. As Adventists, we are called to carry the light in crisis and tragedy, so we look at every event as an opportunity to live God's love and to share about Christ's return when these kinds of tragedies will be no more." End quote. Visit news.adventist.org to read more.
On June 23, residents of the United Kingdom voted for the country to leave the European Union, making it the first nation to ever leave the political-economic formation of the 28 member states. The 17.4 million votes cast to leave the Union, as opposed to the 16.1 million votes to remain, led to changing 43 years of the continent's history since the UK joined the European community in 1973. In response to the vote to leave the Union, which is commonly referred to as Brexit, Adventist leaders from the Church's trans-European region called for unity, love, and commonwealth as the territory reacts to the decision. Furthermore, leaders have examined the implications Brexit will have on the Church. Rafiat Kamal, president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Trans-Europe, said, quote, "Change of itself is not a problem. We must simply find the best way to react to the change. It may even be that in such times of uncertainty, people may look more to faith-based solutions, a security that as Adventists we can certainly provide." End quote. Visit news.adventist.org to read more on how Adventist leaders in Europe are responding to the Brexit. And later in today's program, see a special report about the biblical explanation of what is taking place in Europe.
A new president was recently elected to serve the Seventh-day Adventist Church's Southern Africa Indian Ocean region, which consists of 3 million members in 20 countries. Solomon Maposa, a Zimbabwe native and longtime administrator of the denomination, was elected last week by the church's executive committee. Maposa most recently served the church's territory as its executive secretary. He replaces Paul Ratsara, who resigned from the position on May 31. In response to the election of Maposa, president of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church, Ted Wilson said, quote, "Pastor Maposa has a great love for God's church and for evangelistic outreach and mission. I have known Pastor Maposa for many years, and it will be a privilege to work closely with him since, as with all division presidents, he also will be a General Conference vice president." End quote. The church's executive committee also elected Gideon Reneke to fill Maposa's previous position as executive secretary of the territory. Reneke previously worked as the region's field secretary and director of Sabbath School and Personal Ministries.
Members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Russia this week observed a day of fasting and prayer over proposed legislation that would severely restrict missionary activity in the country. The legislation containing the restrictions was approved by Russia's lower house of parliament, the State Duma, on June 24. The restrictions would include banning religious gatherings in homes and requiring those who wish to share their faith online or through religious literature to first secure proper documentation. In order for the legislation to become law, it needs to be approved by Russia's upper house of parliament, also known as the Federation Council, and then get approval by the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Leaders of the Adventist Church's Eurasia region, which includes Russia, called for the day of fasting and prayer as they appealed to President Putin to reject the legislation. Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Adventist Church in Eurasia, Oleg Goncharov, wrote an open letter to President Putin calling for him to reject the legislation. In the letter he said, quote, "If the legislation is approved, the religious situation in the country will grow considerably more complicated, and many believers will find themselves in exile and subjected to reprisals because of our faith. All of this can't help but worry all faithful Seventh-day Adventist Christians who have carried out their activities in Russia for more than 130 years." End quote. Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Seventh-day Adventist World Church, Ghanum Diop, has more on the religious freedom implications of the proposed legislation.
What is at stake here is really more than just freedom to worship or not to worship. What is at stake here includes all the other fundamental freedoms, in which is freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, freedom of choice, and even deeper than that, freedom of thought. So this is the reason why it is so important that the Russian government and the legal authorities would preserve the fundamental freedoms, the human rights that the international community has actually embraced. So this is why it's important. Religious freedom is like a compound freedom that includes all the other fundamental freedoms. They are inseparable, in other words.
It's been nearly 3 weeks since a lone gunman opened fire in a nightclub in Orlando, Florida, which resulted in the deadliest mass shooting in recent history of the United States. The gunman killed 49 people and injured 53. As affected families continue to mourn the loss of their loved ones and comfort victims, Adventist Community Services, or ACS, has committed itself to equipping local pastors and members to serve those in need. Through its partnership with the Catholic Charities Organization, ACS has organized 4 teams of local pastors to provide on-call spiritual care. ACS is also providing spiritual counseling through the American Red Cross and Florida's volunteer organizations active in disasters. According to Derek Lee, Director of Adventist Community Services Disaster Response, while ACS primarily responds to natural disasters that call for specific physical aid, the spiritual services the ministry is providing in Orlando are just as needed. When speaking about the ACS teams that offered counseling and prayer to shooting victims who were being treated at Florida Hospital, he said, quote, "They want to see that someone wants to take time to see them."
As a result of a partnership with the government of Monterrey, Mexico, members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the city are set to share healthy lifestyle tips to 300,000 homes. Representatives from the church and local government signed a memorandum of understanding on May 23 that officially launched the citywide promotion of the church's I Want to Live Healthy campaign. The memorandum allows literature evangelists to take part in a neighborhood doctor initiative, which was designed by the municipal government to inform, educate, and survey residents on health-related topics. According to government leaders, the Neighborhood Doctor program has the objective to turn Monterrey into a healthy city by generating a culture of health prevention, as well as early detection of non-communicable and degenerative diseases. Representative from Monterrey's Ministry of Health, Francisco Gonzalez Alinas, thanked the Adventist Church for being an example of healthy living and for conducting various health outreach events throughout the city. He said, quote, "Thank you for being available and helping citizens not only with regards to health, but in all other social assistance areas. You're a church that really concerns itself with the well-being of persons."
As the northernmost part of Colombia continues to experience a severe drought due to an El Niño, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, or ADRA, has mobilized resources to address malnutrition throughout the region. ADRA Colombia earlier this month delivered 52 tons of humanitarian aid to residents who live in La Guajira. Effects of the drought have killed hundreds of children and livestock throughout the past 5 years. Director of ADRA Colombia, Gabriel Villarreal, said, quote, "This devastating drought in Guajira has moved us into action. Most of Guajira has not received rain for several years, which has affected so many communities. It really concerns us. Just to think that many of the young children in Guajira have never seen rain is astonishing," end quote. The historic project brought volunteers from 17 church territories from across the nation. During ADRA's 5-day intervention, 75 volunteers distributed food, clothes, shoes, and offered free medical care and medicine. The volunteers also provided haircuts and recreational activities for thousands of indigenous families living throughout the desert region.
Officials from the British Virgin Islands recently joined Adventist leaders and youth as they celebrated a milestone anniversary of the church's Pathfinder ministry in the Caribbean territory. More than 2,000 people gathered at the sports complex in Tortola to mark the 40th anniversary of the ministry. The Premier of the Virgin Islands, Honorable D. Orlando Smith, reminded the youth of the positive influence they can have in their communities. Smith said, quote, "You have a heavy responsibility to maintain the values of the Bible," end quote. Also, during the 3-day event, the Minister of Education and Culture for the British Virgin Islands, Honorable Myron Walwyn, applauded the values the church teaches young people through Pathfinders. He said, quote, "The church has what the youth of the world wants. Stick to it. If you do, you will make it." The teachings of discipline and of love and respect that you see in the Pathfinder Club should be applied in your everyday life. Any success achieved by departing from values will not last.
Coming up, 200 residents of Fiji receive free health screenings.
But up next, members of the smallest island in the South Pacific construct the nation's first Adventist church.
My brother's unexpected death shocked me into changing my life. A friend of mine said, "Why don't you do a triathlon?" So I swam and rode and ran until I discovered life is more than just human strength. I race because my health matters. I believe because my faith matters. I'm Ed. I'm a Christian. I am an Ironman, and I've discovered my whole life matters.
May I work in with you, young fella?
Yeah. Go for it.
That's the way you do it. Gotta put a little weight on it. Well, I'll put it back up here for you.
Welcome back.
And now we have more news from our global church community.
After waiting more than 10 years, Adventist members in the South Pacific's Republic of Nauru are building the nation's first Seventh-day Adventist church. The structure will be a house of worship for guests and the nation's 32 Adventist members. The construction project will also include a house for the church's pastor. Adventist members who live in Nauru, which is the world's smallest island nation and the world's smallest independent republic, are actively involved in their community by visiting asylum seekers in the nation's immigration center. Ministerial Executive Secretary for the Adventist Church in the Trans-Pacific region, Ronald Stone, has also met with several key people in Nauru's government to discuss starting a church-run primary school.
Also in the South Pacific, more than 200 people received free health resources during an expo organized by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Fiji. Guests had access to free medical checkups as well as free consultations from dietitians and physiotherapists. Attendees also had an opportunity to purchase vegetarian food and additional materials from the local Adventist Book Center. Leaders from other denominations also contacted the Adventist Church to request information on how to run their own health expos. In response, Health Director for the Adventist Church in Fiji, Dr. Alapit Vakamosia, said, quote, "They are welcome to our resources. We are blessed to be able to use the health message for God's glory."
In an effort to become a positive influence on their peers, a group of 10 Adventist youth in Dhaka, Bangladesh, sought out mentorship from leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the region. Representatives from the church's Women's, Youth, and Nurturing Discipleship and Reclamation Ministries held a one-day seminar to address challenges Adventist youth face and to offer advice in areas of church involvement and relationships. Seminar participants learned how they can creatively fill needs and establish friendships and communities. Based on participants' responses throughout the day, the Dhaka youth have dedicated themselves to serving others as they seek to become positive influences in the predominantly non-Christian country.
More than 50 Adventist radio managers, technicians, and communicators from 3 regions of Africa attended the Adventist World Radio, or AWR, advisory last week to enhance their technical skills to become equipped for excellence in broadcasting. Delegates met at the headquarters of the Adventist Church in the East Central Africa region in Nairobi, Kenya, from June 23 to June 27. The Specialized Training Conference, also known as an advisory, is sponsored once every 5 years by AWR and serves as a time for radio producers to showcase the impact of radio ministry while demonstrating its unique ability to transform lives for God's kingdom. The African regions represented at the training included East Central Africa, Southern Africa and Indian Ocean, and West Central Africa. According to church leaders, AWR has invested more than $1 million to help establish FM stations in Africa throughout the past decade. There are now at least 22 FM stations in the East Central Africa region alone. As AWR leaders celebrated the advancements on the continent, they also addressed challenges that are faced in various parts of Africa, including transmission issues and follow-up initiatives with listeners who live in remote territories. The next AWR advisory is set to take place in the nation of South Africa in 2021.
The nation of Lebanon has 1 million refugees within its borders, making it the country with the most refugees per capita. Half of the refugees are children. In response, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency created an educational program to help school-age children maintain their studies. ADRA Lebanon has more.
كنا نلعب طابة كنا ننبسط كنا نلعب مع رفقاتي وأنبسط لأنه في حرب وهناك يعني في خطورة بجوز حدا لا سمح الله يروح من بيناتنا صار يجي طيارات ويضربوا صار في ضرب قدام بيتنا.
There are over 51 million displaced people worldwide. Lebanon alone hosts over 1 million refugees, making it the country with the most refugees in the world per capita. 50% of the refugees are children who are in need of protection and education opportunities. Since 2014, ADRA has been providing child-friendly spaces and education opportunities for children in the El Metan district.
أنا استفدت وقت دخلت على مركز آدرا كنت ما بعرف أول شيء ما بعرف لا أقرأ ولا أكتب وبحب بس أكبر صير معلمة مات وعربي مشان خلي غيري يستفاد مثل واحد ما بيعرف يقرأ أعلمه مشان خلي غيري يستفاد مثل ما أنا استفدت وأنا صغيرة.
ADRA needs your support to continue these and other activities to ensure that children do not miss out on education.
عادي المهم نتعلم.
The needs are great, but together we can change the world, one child at a time.
And finally in the news this week, an Adventist pastor from England is preparing to provide spiritual support to the thousands of athletes who will compete during the 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Richard Daly will be a part of a team of ministers and spiritual leaders from various world faiths, including Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and Hinduism, who will serve in the Interfaith Center for the duration of the Olympic Games. Daly currently serves the denomination as the communication director for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Britain. Daly has also served as chaplain in the previous 4 Summer Olympic Games, which took place in Sydney, Australia, Athens, Greece, Beijing, China, and London, England.
Coming up, find out what happened this week in Adventist history.
But up next, find out what the biblical book of Daniel may have to say about the current political climate in Europe.
A recent study found that regularly working overtime increases the risk of heart disease by 60%. Yet the typical American works 47 hours a week, 164 more hours per year than only 20 years ago. And 1/3 don't even take all their earned vacation days. And that doesn't even count additional work responsibilities at home or a second job. That's a fact. But there's hope. Research suggests that it is not the intensity of energy expenditure that produces burnout, but rather the duration of expenditure without recovery. God foresaw our dilemma and gave us the Sabbath, a weekly gift of physical, mental, and spiritual renewal in our demanding lives.
God designed life, not just Adam and Eve. He designed the complete package. For me to have the chance to work in a field that allows me to experience that, see, I designed that. I can take credit for it. It's okay. God gave me the inspiration, He gave me the skills, but He gave me the chance to enjoy the creation itself, to be part of that process. That's pretty cool.
As the ramifications of United Kingdom's Brexit vote continue to unfold, some are wondering if the Bible has anything to say about what is taking place in the territory.
The Adventist Review prepared the following report that explains what we can learn from a king and his dreams, which took place thousands of years ago.
This vote for Britain to leave the European Union is going to have huge ramifications which we can't really predict or foresee. Some we can, but many we can't. But at the moment it's hard to see these many different countries with their very different histories, including histories of enmity to each other. It's very hard to see them being able to cleave together. The European Union's origin is, of course, in World War II, this extraordinary catastrophe. A generation of people, Europeans, who say, we cannot do this again. There was an understanding that if you want to preserve peace, you need to have some kind of economic system that doesn't cause hatred, that doesn't cause rivalry. Many people won't understand or know that religion was actually a very important ingredient in the establishment of the European Economic Community. There is still a religious element to much of the debate in the European Union. In the early 2000s, the then president of the European Commission, Romano Prodi, actually published a book. It was in Italian, but the translated title means An Idea of Europe. And he said, what can hold these many different countries? It's not enough for the elites to propose a political union. There has to be something cultural. And he said, the one thing that all Europeans have in common, the one thing that can bind us all together, is loyalty to the church. But he was Italian. What did he mean? He meant the Roman Catholic Church.
That's the story of people trying to make Europe into a powerhouse and yet failing again and again. Think about Napoleon. Everything looked perfect, and yet a decade and it fell. Think about Hitler. It failed. As a European, I grew up with the question, how does Europe fit into Bible prophecy? Daniel chapter 2, the king has a dream, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and in that dream he sees a huge statue, a beautiful statue. Different metals are used to indicate different kingdoms. He starts off as the head, the golden head, Babylon, Medo-Persia, the Greek Empire, and then finally the strength of the Roman Empire. But there's something else. There are toes and feet that are made up of mixed clay and iron. And Daniel, somehow, he says, they will not stick together. Some is strong, some is weak. And that seems to be the story of Europe.
Especially given recent circumstances. Situation in Greece, Spain, Italy, Cyprus, where the core EU countries, the northern EU countries, are seen as oppressive, as meddling in people's affairs. At the same time, we have to say, all kinds of ethnic and nationalist hatreds that seem to have died in the ruins of World War II and have not been seen for 70 years are somehow magically and disturbingly reappearing. So given all these strains that are on the European Union, for one of the three biggest economies, the chief contributor to a common defense and foreign policy, to leave, this is just going to create a vacuum at the heart.
Prophecy is not just something interesting we study, in history books or in Bible classes. We can get our bearings, the great direction, the big picture from prophecy. Scripture tells us that there will not be another united Europe. It will be weak and strong, and we can see that. But that's not where the story ends. Daniel chapter 2 doesn't end with a statue and the feet of mixed clay and iron. There's a rock. It's small at first, but that rock smashes the entire statue. That little rock that becomes a huge rock is Jesus Christ, a new kingdom, God's kingdom.
And finally, for today's program, let's turn to David Trim for a look at Adventist history. This week, learn how the church's message reached Western Canada.
Welcome to This Week in Adventist History. On June 26, in 1890, two evangelists, Isaac Morrison and Volney Lucas, began a series of tent meetings in Vancouver. This was the first evangelistic campaign in British Columbia, and it was highly successful, leading to the creation of the first local Seventh-day Adventist church on the west coast of Canada later that year, 1890. On June 28, in 1893, Knud Brorson, pioneer Adventist missionary, passed away in Sweden. Brorson had been born in Denmark, but in 1868, at the age of 22, he had emigrated to the United States, where he was converted to Adventism. And in 1878, he went back to Scandinavia, where his evangelistic preaching helped build up the church. He also helped lay the foundations for the health work that remained an important aspect of Adventism in the Nordic countries of Europe for over 100 years. Sadly, he died of a hemorrhage, aged just 47. On June 29, 1995, the 56th General Conference session convened in the ancient city of Utrecht in the Netherlands, with 2,352 delegates in attendance. This was only the second time a General Conference session met outside North America, and there has yet to be a third time. And on July 1, 1896, the first Adventist school in Brazil began operating in the city of Curitiba. It was founded by dedicated lay people led by Guilherme Stein. The school no longer exists, but today Adventist education in Brazil is flourishing. That was This Week in Adventist History.
Thanks for watching ANN. Join us next week for more news from the headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
In the meantime, join our global conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can connect with Adventists worldwide through more stories, photos, and videos. Visit Facebook/Adventist News, Twitter @Adventist Church, and Instagram @Adventist Church.
Our good news for this week comes from the book of Isaiah chapter 40, verses 30 and 31. The passage says, "Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint."
That's our program for this week. And remember, you can always visit news.adventist.org for daily news and videos. Until next time, God bless.
Take care.